We're going to be covering a lot of the basics about land use and zoning, and hopefully leave time for some questions at the end, hopefully a significant amount of time. So in your window that you're looking at, there should be a place to send questions. Clayton Dodds here was set all this up for me because I've never done a webinar before. We'll be moderating those questions, and hopefully we'll have time for some of them when we get started. So about another minute or so, and then we'll get going. In the meantime, you could stare at me, I guess. Okay, so I got the good to go sign, so here I go. Today we're going to be talking about land use and zoning in California, mostly really with a local flair, because this is where I practice up here in Northern California, and have for the last 31 years. So sometimes you'll have to bear with me because I've never done a webinar before. I've done a lot of public speaking, and usually there's people in the room, not just me staring at myself. So. But we'll try to get used to that in a short while and move along. So the first thing is we have to give you our traditional disclaimer, of course, because we're lawyers. So everything we're going to be talking about today is pretty generic. If you have specific issues that you need help on, you can always give us a call. But today are sort of general issues, and for those lawyers that are watching, and for those clients that are watching, you all know that you rarely get a yes or no answer from a lawyer. So this is going to be no exception to that rule. So if you have specific issues, please contact us and we can help you, or throw a question at us towards the end. But everything we talk about today, there are exceptions, and a lot of the things we talk about today are very basic, and life generally throws much more complicated things at us. And so those need individual analysis. So hopefully you all understand that. This is my introduction. I'm Charlie Bronitsky. I'm been practicing law, mostly in the real estate law, for now 31 years. I'm a graduate of the University of California, Both Hall School of Law, although I guess they don't call it Hall School of Law anymore. It's now Berkeley Law, something like that. Most of my practice has been up here in Northern California, in the San Francisco Bay Area, although I did have some significant clients down in Los Angeles back in the 1990s. My background is I was a partner in a law firm of about 75 people. I did a lot of real estate work for what was then the largest developer in the country, Lincoln Property Company. Did real estate work for the state of California and a variety of large organizations. I left the practice towards the end of the last millennium and started a much smaller practice for myself to spend more time with family and more time locally. On my other life, I'm currently the mayor of the city of Foster City, a place I call paradise on earth. And it's my 8th year on the city council there. I have one more year and then I'm turned out. And 4 years before that, I spent time on their planning commission. So I understand the land use issues, zoning issues, and a lot of other issues, not just from the legal side, but from the practical side of what government does and how it processes these things. So that's who I am. And so today's subject is the basics of land use and zoning. So zoning is the sort of the basic set of restrictions that are placed on private land and public land as well. So the concept that lots of people think that it's my land, I can do with it what I want, isn't really so. So certainly not around here, and not in probably 99.9% of the places in our country. Every use of land is in some way restricted by government, and the basic way that it's restricted by government is zoning. So it's called zoning because every piece of property is in a zone. Some of them are easy to determine. So if you drive around your neighborhood and there's all houses, that's most likely a residential zone. And when you go to the shopping mall, that's probably mostly a commercial zone. So what we're going to talk about today are what are zones, what can be built in various zones, how do you find all that stuff out, and how do you get things done. So for zoning, there's really 4 subsets of I want to do a particular thing with a particular property. And the most basic is a permitted use. So a permitted, for example, in a residential zone, building a residence is permitted. But even in that sense, there are limitations as to what's allowed and what's not allowed, and what's allowed based on certain additional conditions. So within each zone, there are sort of subzones. So there could be, one of the most common is what's called commonly called R1. So R1 is a single family residential. So if you wanted to build, an apartment building there, you probably couldn't do that, even though it's residential. But you could build a single family home. But say you wanted to do an addition. So there are additional restrictions. Even if what you want to build is traditionally allowed in the place that you're building, there are still additional restrictions. So I have a single story house. I want to put a second story on it. What do I have to do? Well, you have to determine whether or not your addition will make your house too large for the land that you have it on. So every city, let me back up a little bit. So if you live in an incorporated city, then the rules of that city apply, and the rules of that city are found in their municipal code. If you live in an unincorporated portion of a city, that's really county. So again, they have also their own codes, and those codes would apply. So most of us live within a city, and every city has restrictions. And the most difficult problem of living around here is that we have a lot of relatively small cities. So for me, I come from a small city back east. You may have heard of it, New York City. That's one big city. Around here, there's nothing like that. I mean, San Francisco is a large city, but it's less than 1 million people, and San Jose is about 1 million people. All the rest of the cities are relatively small, and there's a significant number of them that surround the bay. And so each one of them has their own separate rules, their own separate zones, their own separate subzones, and all those kinds of things. So it kind of starts out with things that the first thing you need to do is figure out what is it you want to do and whether or not you can do that in the zone that you're in. And again, either it's allowed, it's not allowed, or it could be allowed under particular restrictions. So what's not allowed? So let's again focus on R1 because it's the simplest, it's the one most people are familiar with. So a single family house. So single family houses in most jurisdictions have height restrictions. Single family houses in most jurisdictions have what's called setbacks. So a setback is the distance from the property line to the front of the house. So 10 feet, 20 feet in the front of the house, 10 feet, 20 feet in the back of the house, 5 feet on the sides. Those are not uncommon setbacks. And so if you wanted to build your addition was going to be built closer to the property line than that, they call that an encroachment. So you would be encroaching into the setback. So a lot of this is when you deal with cities and towns and counties, you have to learn the lingo. But basically that means that you're building too close, and they would not approve that. So again, a restriction on it's my land, I'll do what I want with it, is you can't build in the setbacks, you can't build higher than the height restrictions. Pretty much everyone has size restrictions, but size restrictions are measured differently in different cities and different counties. So zoning size restriction, one common way to measure that is floor area ratio. So floor area ratio is the ratio between the total square footage of floor space in your building, in your home, versus the total square footage of your property. And then the complexity comes in as the garage count, the different things, there's attic count, and different cities treat it in different ways. And some cities do it a little bit differently. So, for example, in Foster City, where I live, they have a lot coverage. So you can't cover more than a certain percentage of the lot, and that's the size restriction, as opposed to a floor area ratio. So, says the slide that you're looking at says example spot zoning. So spot zoning would be where they change the zoning just for a small piece of land. So you'd be in the middle of a residential zone, and they decide that your particular parcel is now going to be commercial. That's generally prohibited. So that's really not a solution to some of the things that some of the restrictions that you might have in zoning. So terms and definitions. Okay, some of this I already talked about briefly, so every city, every county has a provision in their municipal code, their county code, called zoning, and it sets forth all the various zones they have and all the restrictions within that zone. And so the process really, and most often, unless you're a lawyer or unless you're an architect or an engineer and you're doing design, the average homeowner or even developer for that matter, a lot of them will hire professionals to go and figure all those things out. What zone they're in, what's the maximum they can build there, what kinds of things they can build there, what are the setbacks, the floor area ratio, some of the stuff that we've already covered. But so when you're building something, sometimes there's the permitted use, as we talked about. So long as you don't violate the floor area ratio, you're not in the setbacks, you're not violating the height restriction. Generally, you have a right to increase the size of your home, to add to put an addition, a new bedroom, push the living room back, lots of different things. Put on a second story, probably the most common thing, and that would be considered a permitted use. Turning it into multifamily, although that's now a more complicated issue with some recent state law about accessory dwelling units. That might not be. So that might not be. It might be an impermissible use. And then there's two other sort of exceptions. So one is a conditional use, and I think it'll be more obvious when we try to take a live look at how this works. So a conditional use is based on another additional bunch of approvals and conditions that are laid out in the municipal codes or the county codes for the municipality, the county or the city. They'll tell you that these are if you want to do something other than have a house, for example, in a residential zone, what things you can have and what's required to happen. So, for example, if you wanted to have a daycare, so you want to go and buy a house and have a daycare. In a lot of places in an R1 zone, that would be a conditional use, and you probably need to research and find out what the conditions are. And so there would have to be probably some additional inspections, there'd be some licensure, there'd be a bunch of other things. And those things vary again from city to city, from county to county. But there are things other than residential use that are allowed in a residential zone, and there are things other than commercial use that are allowed in a commercial zone. There are things other than industrial use that are allowed in industrial zones. And so in order to find those out, you would work with a professional, or I'll show you how to do it. It's not all that hard. to figure out what zone you're in and what the restrictions are. And those all have conditional uses, and they tell you what can qualify for a conditional use and how you go about qualifying for additional use. And it's usually a submittal to the planning department and all the things that they require, and then quite often public hearings. And sometimes there's public hearings, architectural review hearings. Some cities have architectural review boards. All cities have planning commissions, and planning commissions review those kinds of things. And then ultimately it goes to the board of supervisors in a county or the city council in a city. Then the sort of the fourth exception, the fourth condition, is variance. A lot of people call lots of changes a variance, but a variance is probably the most difficult to get and the most restrictive. So a variance is issued when there's something unique about the property. So a corner lot, for example. So a corner lot, you could be building with the house facing on one street or the house facing on another street. And depending on how you lay out the house and which way the government considers the front of the house, you could be in violation of setbacks. So often in conditions like that, you apply for a variance. And the variance has to do with the unique conditions of the parcel, the area, but it's still generally what you want to build is still of the type of use that's permitted in the area. So it's not like you could build an office building on that corner lot residential zone. You could build a residence, but maybe that you would situate the residence in a different way. And the reason you're doing that is because of the unique quality of that lot. And so in those conditions, again, you get a variance. And a variance is much like a conditional use permit, where you have to go out and do additional submittals, work through the planning department. It's always good to the planning department to recommend approval. You probably have to go through architectural review either in the board or the planning commission again, and you can have to go all the way up to the city council in most of those. Again, just sort of to recap, so there's permitted uses, there's non-permitted uses, there's conditional uses, and there's uses that require a variance. So that's sort of the basic elements of what happens within each zone. And the major zones, and there's a lot of exceptions and a lot more exceptions, but they are residential, commercial, industrial, and probably at least since as long as I've been practicing, then some mixed use. And for me, growing up in Brooklyn, mixed use was pretty common. So on the ground floor, there was stores. There was the bakery and the supermarket, and then you lived above the store. So that wasn't so common in most of the suburban areas around here, and they sort of segregated everything. And now people are putting those things back together, and something they have been doing for a while, but it's now become more common in the suburban areas where you have the mixed use. So there's a commercial use and there's a residential use, and those developments are mixed together. And one of the things I'll talk about later is how do those zones come to be if they didn't already exist? And so we'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's see where we go now. Okay, so again, this is what a lot of this is what I've talked about a little already. So those basic zones, again, those are the basics. So for residential, for example, there could be R1, R2, RM, which is multifamily, and then within each one of those, there can be low density, moderate density, high density, and in every city, in the counties, for the unincorporated sections, they all vary by the city and the county as to what you can do in a particular area and within a particular zone. And as I said before, the place to go find that is the municipal code or the county code in their zoning provisions. And again, so that talks mostly about the different types of zone basics and the subzone categories. there's, so if you now want to take it over to commercial, so there's areas where, there's commercial in the form of retail. There's areas where there's commercial in the form of office. There's areas where there's commercial in the form of healthcare. There's a lot of sub areas within a number of these things, and the restrictions vary by the zone, and the zones vary by the municipality that's in charge of that particular land. Again, so a lot of this I've already spoken about. These are the basic types of zones. There's commercial, industrial, residential, mixed use. There's, again, special types of zones for special uses at special times. There's things called plan unit developments, plan use developments. There's things depending on what you want to develop. Most of those special and mixed uses are less common for the average people and much more common for large-scale developers. So if you want to put in a new development, you want to change an old office park into residential or mixed use, a lot of those zoning restrictions and requirements come into play. How to get these exceptions. So conditional uses. So we talked a bit about conditional uses. Everything is an application process. So you would be able to go to the relevant code, and towards the end, I'm going to hopefully be able to do a walkthrough. It's going to depend upon the speed, the internet speed, whether we can get that done. But so let me sort of just walk you through how you do that. So if you want to do this on your own, you can start out with the place that almost everybody starts nowadays, is good old Google. And let's say you're here in Palo Alto and you want to find out what the current zoning is for your property. So you type in Palo Alto zoning map. And the wonderful thing about the internet is you don't have to go anywhere. You can do this in your home, in your office. And up's going to come some links, and the very top link is going to send you to the Palo Alto citywide zoning map. And depending on where you are, you'll either get an entire map or you'll get a bunch of links to smaller maps of smaller areas. In Palo Alto, you get a bunch of links, and you just kind of try to figure out where you are on that map, and you click into the link. And what it's going to do is going to show you every street, every parcel, and it'll show you in some color-coded process. Okay, well. Sorry, the slides were changing and I wasn't changing them, so I guess Clayton was helping out there. So the zoning map's going to tell you in that color coding or in letters and numbers what zone you're in. And once you know what zone you're in, it's back to good old Google, and then you type in, for example, in Palo Alto, you type in Palo Alto Municipal Code or Palo Alto Zoning Code, and it sends you to a link on Palo Alto's website, and you click on that link, and it gets you to the municipal code, and in the municipal code there's a chapter on zoning, and in that chapter on zoning you would go and find out based on the letter designation that you found out. So this building, for example, is CC2, Community Commercial 2. And so if I want to know what I could do in Community Commercial 2, I go to the zoning code and I look up for CC2, and it lays out all of the things that I could possibly do with my property. So again, it lays out the things that are permitted uses, it shows me what I can't do, and it shows me what I can do on a conditional use. Now, these codes don't show you anything about variances, because variances relate to the specific configuration of your property. So they apply to everything, and they're given based on the uniqueness of the particular parcel in relation to what you want to do. But permitted use, non-permitted use, and conditional uses are all laid out in the municipal code for each particular zone. The other way, if you don't want to go through the map, a lot of these, and you want to try to find the zone, a lot of cities have a place where you could find them by the address of your property, or there's others like you can find by the assessor parcel number. So assessor parcel number isn't something that most lay people are familiar with, but if you have the grant deed to your house laying around somewhere, there'll be that number. It's an APN, so it's an APN, and then it'll look like a social security number more or less. Sometimes three three-digit sequences, sometimes 323. Sometimes other things, but that's the APN, and those will take you back in through the parcel map and tell you what the zoning is for your particular property. So let's see where we are. Now, once you've done that, and once you've decided what you want to do, if you realize that it's a permitted use, then you can start to do some design. But I always recommend, you want to do any use of your property, that first thing you should do is to go visit the planning department. So every single planning department around here that I know of, and I've done work with San Francisco planning, with most of the Bayside cities, in fact, and Half Moon Bay too, but of the Bayside cities in San Mateo County, a lot of the cities in Santa Clara County, a few of the cities in Alameda County, all of them, their planning departments have counter hours. And if you just go on the city's website or the county's website and you find the planning department somewhere in their website, it'll tell you what their counter hours. And they have planning staff professionals who can answer general questions. They'll be able to look up the records for your property and answer any of your questions, and you can run by some ideas by them. Again, that conversation is binding, but you're going to kind of get a pretty decent feel for whether what you want to do is something that the staff would approve. Getting staff approval as you go down the line is always a good thing. So you want the staff in your public hearing, or for whatever it's coming up next, to be recommending approval of what you have, and you don't want to be fighting against staff. Not that you can't get something approved if staff doesn't want to do it. Often staff is just a recommendation. And even when staff makes the decision, those decisions are appealable. But it's always good to have a good relationship with the staff. Most of the people you'll find at the planning counters and the planning staff and the building staff are friendly. They try to be helpful. They're respectful for what you want to do, that you're a resident of their community. Every once in a while you run into someone who's not, but it's generally rare. They're going to help you try to find ways to do what you want to do, because that's really their job. And so the planning department, all of the cities have counter times, and if you're in an unincorporated area, so some of the big ones in San Mateo County area, up in the hills in Redwood City, there's a lot of unincorporated county area. Then you have to do the same thing, but just at the county level. And again, the planning staff are very helpful in trying to give you a good understanding of your property and what you want to do, and tell you whether that's possible. So that's the good thing to do first before you go out and hire an architect, or go down with your architect or designer early, just to make sure that you're not going to be spending a lot of money designing something that's not going to be built. So that's my primary recommendation is don't start until you've gone down there and said hi. Architects and engineers. So for most people, so I'm probably an exception. So if I wanted to do one house, I'd probably go down to the planning department. Only because I know everybody, at least in my city, but I know a lot of people in other cities in planning, and so I get some ideas and some feedback. But most people who are not design professionals, they send their architect, their engineer, sometimes their contractor down there, because often if it's a small addition, you might have the contractor do some of the design drawings for you. But again, still send somebody down there and talk to those folks. So one of the things that's kind of confusing for people who have no experience in this area is planning versus building. So when do I have to go to a planning department, and when do I have to go to a building department? So it seems like, well, look, what I want to do is build. Why do I have to go to the planning department? Well, the planning department's job is to make sure that you're in compliance with zoning. So they'll need plans. They'll be able to determine whether you're violating the height restrictions, the setbacks, the floor area ratio. That's their job. Their job is to do what's called a plan check. So they take the plans that you submit and they make sure that it applies to the particular zone you're in and the particular lot that you're going to build on. So often there's a series of back and forth with the plans that you present, and then they will approve them. They'll make some comments. They'll also be the place that will talk to you about things like what your property looks like. So, if you have sort of a window in the middle of a wall that from the exterior looks like Cyclops, more or less, they might not allow you. They might give you some alternatives. They might talk to you about privacy issues. So if you're building a second story and it's going to look into certain parts of your neighbor's property, they might discuss those areas with you. They might suggest revisions to your plans. That's the thing that planning does. So until you get through planning and get planning's approval, there's no point in going to the building department. The building department's job is to make sure that what you build that's been approved by planning is in accordance with what was approved and is built to one of the building codes. So there's all sorts of different building codes that apply. Sometimes you don't necessarily need a permit. It depends how in a minor matter. So, for example, if you're pulling up linoleum and you're going to put down tile, you don't need building permits for any of that stuff. Replacing existing windows with the same size window, but maybe a different style of frame, you don't need. But if you're going to do things like change electrical, change plumbing, change HVAC, heating, ventilating, and air conditioning, and certainly if you're going to do any structural work or any additional square footage, you're going to need to go to planning and you're going to need to get a building permit for those things. And it's very important for many aspects as to why you need to do that and why you should keep it legal and why you should get the permit. There are those who will say, oh, well, you don't need a permit. I can do this cheaper if you don't get a permit. You're just asking for trouble. When you go to sell your house, there's a checkbox on the form, the statutorily required form that says, did you ever build without permits? And what I think some people don't realize, but most of the lawyers in this area know that if you buy a house and stuff was built without permits and then you go to remodel that house and the inspector comes in and finds the old work, you get to fix that too. So, and those things can be significantly costly. They can be time disruptive. They can make it so you have to leave your home, move out for a while they do things. They can make it so you can tear things out. You can make it so rooms, illegal additions have to be completely removed. The consequences of building without permits or even buying something that was built without permits can be severe. So I always urge people to make sure that you obtain your permits and you build in accordance with those permits. So those are kind of the two areas, about what you want to do once you've determined that you can build what you want to build in your zone. The other part of planning is if you need something like a conditional use permit. So if you want to take your single family house, for example, and turn it into a senior nursing facility, that would probably require a conditional use permit. That's primarily planning. So again, you go into planning, you go through the process with them of getting a conditional use permit. Anytime you're doing external modifications, so adding square footage, changing the nature of the use, you're probably going to have to go through some form of public hearing, and it's going to depend upon what municipality you're in, what type of hearing. So some, as I said earlier, in some there's like an architectural review, and others there's a planning commission review. Most of all of those are things that you want to have the staff, recommending approval of those things. So starting with the planning staff, working with them to get stuff that they would approve is essential. So let's see. Sorry, I'm old. Have to put my glasses on so I can see what this slide says because it's a lot smaller for me. Okay, so it's the planning department, the planning process that I just sort of described. So you're getting general guidance from the planning department, the early meeting, submitting the plans, getting your plan check comments. Once you've resolved that, hopefully you then have the planning staff's recommendation, and then those plans, if there is an architectural review committee, they get submitted to the planning commission, and there's a notice public hearing. And so even if you want to build a second story, often so neighbors are required to get notice. So sometimes neighbors will come out and they'll object. Neighbor will come and say, well, your second story now looks into my living room, or now looks into my bedroom, or there's no screening. And so often in that process, there might be additional changes recommended by the planning commission to plant higher trees, move a fence, move a window, those kinds of things. That's the process. And so sometimes there might be multiple planning commission hearings because you may have to make revisions and you may have to come back. At some point, the planning commission makes a decision to either grant or approve your application. If they grant it, then neighbors have the right to appeal. The appeal would go to the city council or the county board of supervisors as applicable, most often the city council, and the city council would hear the whole issue again. If they don't approve it, you have the same rights to go and appeal the decision of the planning commission to the city council or board of supervisors. And they ultimately are the final administrative deciders. So what that means is that after that, your recourse is to go to court. So that doesn't happen all that often. The reason it doesn't happen all that often is cities are granted very broad discretion in what they allow and what they don't allow. So if it's not a clear violation of one of its codes, if it's not an unconstitutional discrimination of some sort, something generally egregious, then most courts around here, and most courts anywhere that I know of, are going to side with the municipality on their decision because that's their decision and they spend a significant amount of time doing it. The other thing that courts sometimes will get involved in is if the process was unfair for some reason. Then a court might send it back and have the process go over. But going to court is your last resort, and which is kind of an unusual thing to say for someone who's spent a lot of time as a lawyer in court. But again, so that takes me back to my original suggestion of trying to find ways to work with the planning staff to get them to recommend approval, because you're going to find you're in better position to get what you want approved that way. And often you may have to make compromise. Compromise is a good thing. You don't get fully what you want, but you don't get everything either. And so that level of compromise will often pay great dividends. So a lot of this I've covered again, planning commissions occasionally. So I think in my recollection is in Palo Alto there's an architectural review committee. So they'll review the exterior architectural features of what you're proposing to make sure that it's consistent with the guidelines that they have, consistent with the zoning. In Foster City, for example, which is a planned community, your project has to be consistent with other projects in the neighborhood. So look and feel, things like that. Now, Foster City doesn't have an architectural review committee. That's all done by the planning commission. And so what they're trying to do is maintain consistency in the neighborhood. So to avoid, those like McMansions or mini mansions that sort of stand out like a sore thumb in the neighborhood. They want to have some community, some neighborhood consistency. Generally, where you're going to find all the rules and regulations are in the ordinances. So that's in the municipal codes of the various cities or county, the county codes. it's going to tell you what the requirements are for what you want, and that's adopted through the ordinance process. So the city council will adopt an ordinance, and the ordinance will modify the municipal code, and that will say what you are permitted and are not permitted to do. Obtaining permits, a lot of this I've covered already. You know, there's permitted use, there's conditional use. It's always easier to get what you want done if it's within the permitted uses. But again, even in permitted uses, as I discussed at the beginning, you know, size, height, proximity to the property lines, all that kind of stuff are considered. Variance, we talked about that earlier. So variance is probably the most subjective of the things, is it's based on the unique circumstances and the unique aspects of the parcel. And I gave you the example of a corner lot, but you could have a triangular lot or a flag lot. So a flag lot is a lot that's really behind all the other houses, and it has access just through a long driveway. So it looks like a flagpole and a flag when you lay it out, and that's why they call it a flag lot. So sometimes in a connection with a flag lot, if the city doesn't have specific requirements for that lot, you may be able to get a variance to do things that are slightly modified from the regular codes because of the nature of that particular lot. And so the process, as I covered, is you submit. So you submit your plans, whatever additional information is required. So often there's a description of the project, a reason, just your attorney, your architect, your designer will put together a 1 or 2 pager to explain sort of an executive summary of what you want and why you want it. Then there's the process of the staff review. At the end of the staff review, once you've gone through the comments, once you've gone all the way down the line, the staff will set the matter for a public hearing and issue a staff report. In that staff report, it will describe what you want to do in great detail, and then ultimately they'll make a recommendation to allow it or not to allow it. And then there'll be planning commission recommendations, and ultimately city council approval or appeal. So now we're going to try to show you all this very quickly in a live presentation. So hopefully this works. So hopefully you're now seeing, oh wow, look at that. So I'm not sure we're going to be able to do this because let's try again. Let's try Google. So here we are. So as I said, they're starting the process. So let's see. Let's just do Palo Alto zoning map. Okay, so gives you the big link. Is moving something around, so I'm not sure anyone's seeing any of this. So if you're not seeing this, what I did so far was I Google, and I typed in Palo Alto zoning maps, and I got a bunch of links. And I was about to click on the link that gets us to the zoning map, but it looks like we're clicking through. So maybe this is not going to work, and maybe what we want to do instead is I'll cover that process again pretty quickly. So what that zoning map in Palo Alto would show us is submaps. I think there's about a dozen or so of them, maybe fewer. And then we'd figure out where we are and click on the larger map. And in that larger map of a smaller area, it would show every single parcel, and it would show the parcel. So you would go to your particular parcel, and it would show you what zone you're in. Then go back to Google, type in Palo Alto Municipal Code. Change Palo Alto for whatever city you happen to live in. All the maps that you'll see online will be different. Most of the municipal codes will link to a service that provides online municipal codes, and those will look very similar to one another. In every single one of them, once you get to the municipal code through 2 or 3 links, there will be a section called zoning. And in that zoning, there'll be a description of exactly what is allowed, what isn't allowed in I don't know if it's working. Maybe we could skip the the map and go right to the municipal code. See if we can get there. Maybe that'll be a little bit faster. Hopefully, I don't know if any of you, if you're seeing all this well. So it doesn't seem like it's, no, I guess I'm not going to get there. So anyway, it was a good try. So you'd go there, and in the section there'd be a chapter on zoning. It's going to say zoning, so it's pretty easy to find. And then in there'll be all the various types of zones, and then what's allowed, what's not allowed, what's allowed on a conditional use. And then there will be a section somewhere in each municipal code about permits, and in the permit section there's generally a description of what you need to go to get a conditional use permit and what the process is and what you have to submit. So that's how the process works in pretty much every city and pretty much all of the counties in one form or another, although there are differences, as I said at the beginning, in every zone. We got about 10 minutes left. I'd like to open it to questions. A lot of what I covered here was very basic. And so, again, I want to thank everyone for taking their time. There's a lot of complicated issues that relate to zoning, and a lot of issues that we're dealing with now in our region. Housing is a huge issue in our region, and affordable housing, especially here on the peninsula in San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara counties. The job growth, I think, has exceeded the housing development by like 12 to 1. And so we're trying to find new ways. This is kind of more like my other hat, my mayor hat, of bringing in, building affordable housing, below market housing, so that people who are of more modest means can continue to live where they work, because it's critically important, and the impact on that has been monstrous for many of us who deal with the daily commute. And so those are key issues of zoning, and because often things like old shopping centers or old industrial areas become these mixed-use centers. And that's a very complicated area of land use, about entering into development agreements with cities, about changing zoning, in that process. And sometimes that process can take years. And sometimes it can take decades, depending on the economic situations. And we've all experienced a lot of that, where there was a lot of projects that came before a variety of cities and counties in 2007, 2006, and in 2008 we had the Great Recession and nothing got built. And so now you see a building boom, but it's not meeting the economic needs, it's not meeting the housing needs. And so there's a lot more that needs to be done. Those are more complicated issues. If you're interested in any of these more complicated issues, we can have another webinar. We can have something a little bit more interactive about that. Send us an email and let us know what you're interested in, and we can do some follow-ups on that. And so now I'm going to, I got it. Sorry, I'm trying to change slides. Like I said, it's my first. I've got to go over to the main chat. I guess on the main chat, it's going to give me. What are examples of, so one of the questions I got are some examples of a reason that a developer can get a variance. So again, it's very hard to say in the abstract. So variances are much more related to the nature of the particular parcel. So the size of the parcel, the nature of the parcel, the location of the parcel, still consistent with the overall zoning restrictions of that particular zone, really deal with variance. Really, that's kind of more of a question I probably have to deal with on some level of specificity as to what you wanted to do and what you want to accomplish. Variances are extraordinary. In that they're probably the least common thing that occurs. A lot of things happen for development and large-scale development, in changing the zoning, in conditional uses and things like that, rather than in variance. So someone asked me if I could name any specific municipalities that are particularly easy to work with or difficult. So I work with these folks all the time. And I don't necessarily think that there's some folks that are more difficult. There's some, for example, there's building inspectors, even within a specific city, that some are more sticklers for the details than others. I would say, as a general rule, but not specifically, the more affluent and exclusive the area, the more they require you to meet the specifics. But that doesn't mean that they're necessarily easy or difficult to work with. A lot of it is how much you want to vary from what's normally approved. I don't want to go out and say that there's cities that are notoriously difficult, because the next person in the door will want me to do something in that city, and I'll get myself in a whole bunch of trouble. But really, if you go there early in the process and you start to show that what you want to be is cooperative, what you want to be is compromising, and do something that's in the benefit of not only yourself but the city and the neighbors, then you're going to find the people much easier to work with. So let's see, is that any? Let's see. No. Anybody else have any other questions? Okay. Well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. So maybe we might end a few minutes early. But again, I want to thank you for joining us today. A lot of this was basic, and I ran through it pretty fast. If you want to do something significant, significant development, or things like that, then I urge you to find someone who can help you through the process, someone familiar with the process. If you want to have future webinars that deal with some more complicated or esoteric areas, one of the things that we've been dealing with in Foster City is workforce housing. And so we like to find places where firefighters, teachers, police officers, city workers can live affordably in our community. And one of the things that we need to be concerned with is to not inadvertently discriminate. So often, even with the best of intentions, the way you set what appears to be non-discriminatory criteria become discriminatory. So we need to take a look at those critical issues, and that's a pretty sophisticated issue, an area of land use and development. But it is something that we can talk about as to how you do these things, how you build community support for those kinds of things. So, if people are interested, if people want to know more about how you go about getting home additions, what to look for in construction contracts, and if you're building, use a licensed contractor and have a written contract to do it. Trust me, I've started out as a construction litigator, and construction litigation is going to cost you way more than having a lawyer put together a contract for you to do building. We can have webinars on that and discuss that. I think I have online a little handbook on construction contracts, a handbook on mechanics liens, things like that would help homeowners avoid those kinds of problems. If you want to learn more about accessory dwelling units, you can. We have some articles online. We have some articles about remodels online. We're a good resource. I think in the slide that's up there has my email and my direct extension. Email's generally the best way to get a hold of me, because I get email no matter where I am, and I move around a lot. So I spend a lot of time driving over the hill to deal with issues in Santa Cruz or down in Monterey or up in San Francisco. I spend a lot of time in a variety of planning and building departments. So again, I want to thank you all very much for attending today. We're here at the Brewer law offices here in Palo Alto, centrally located in the peninsula, just between San Mateo and Santa Clara counties. We serve folks. We do landlord-tenant stuff. We do anything really related to real estate. we're a boutique firm, and we help folks do that, including both significant, major, and relatively minor land use issues to get you what you need and what you want. So please feel free to contact us. Please feel free to email me. Thank you again for your time, and I look forward to hearing from you. And the next time I do a webinar won't be my first. So this was fun. Thank you very much.